Good evening. I'm Jeff Collins, professor of art history and material culture at Bard Graduate Center, and I am delighted to welcome you to this 21st year and the 53rd, believe it or not, convocation of the Françoise and Georges Selz Endowed Lectures in 18th and 19th century French decorative arts, design, and culture. So, although I just said French, when I look back over those 53 lectures, I'm really amazed by how many transnational and even global connections we've been able to explore under this Seltz umbrella. These range from the collecting of French objects in America to the movement of bronze founders between Paris and Potsdam. From the domestication of exotic flowers at Versailles to the reception of Indian ambassadors under Louis XVI, and from the emulation of French style in Manhattan and Palm Beach to our recent Seltz duet on China and France in the intercultural 18th century. Tonight's Seltz lecturer has made a career of crossing borders, both professional and intellectual. A native of Frankfurt, Miriam Schefzyk is Associate Curator in the Department of Sculpture and Decorative Arts at the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles, where she's currently overseeing a comprehensive renovation of the permanent galleries of 17th and 18th century decorative arts. Just 3 weeks ago, she opened the special exhibition Magnified Wonders, an 18th century microscope, co-curated with conservator Arlen Hegenbotham, focusing on a rare French instrument that straddles the realms of art and science. Miriam came to the Getty from the Museum of Decorative Arts in Berlin, where she assisted with the recent exhibition and catalog of the German-descended cabinetmaker Joseph Knops from what is now Eastern Belgium. Better known as José Canops, he operated a royal workshop in Madrid from the 1760s under the direction of an Italian painter and decorator, deploying West Indian hardwoods to produce cosmopolitan objects that can only have emerged from such a rich international milieu. But Miriam was already an internationalist while previously based in Paris, teaching at the École du Louvre, consulting with the Château de Versailles, and assisting in the library of the German Center for Art History. After earning her BA in Marburg with a thesis on artistic collaboration between German and Italians and the Kaisersaal in Würzburg, she focused her MA at the Freie Universität Berlin on the community of German emigrant cabinet makers in 18th century Paris. That project blossomed into her PhD, jointly supervised by the Westfälische Wilhelms-Universität Münster and the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris, in which Miriam used the Baden-born ébéniste Martin Carlin, a hero of the French furniture history, as a case study of what she calls migration and integration, as topical in the 21st century as in the 18th. Thanks to a 2020 prize from the Fondation Marianne Roland-Michel, a French translation of that thesis is forthcoming next month. She tells me it's going to be printed on Friday, and she has a few more corrections to make this evening. On top of all of this, Miriam is collaborating with BGC's own former instructor, curator, and Seltz lecturer, Ulrich Leben, on a biographical handbook of German ébénistes in 18th century Paris, an in-depth archival project that will offer unparalleled insights into the lived realities of the hundreds of young Germans who left their homes and families for a foreign city that was full of obstacles and opportunities in equal measure. It's those Parisian dreams that we'll hear more about tonight, so please join me in welcoming Miriam Schefzyk to the podium.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's really a great privilege to give this Françoise and Georges Selz lecture on 18th and 19th century French decorative arts and culture. I would, of course, particularly like to thank Jeffrey Collins and Mei Ray for the invitation, but also the whole team for the great organization and their hospitality here in New York. So as you heard, this lecture is about a topic that I have extensively researched for many years now. German cabinet makers migrating and working in Paris in the 18th century. And it kind of all started when I moved to Paris as a student many, many years ago. And I discovered my love for the decorative arts and especially for cabinet making. And so, wandering through all the Parisian museums, I couldn't but notice that on the labels of all those extraordinary artworks were these familiar sounding German names: Oeben, Riesener, Schneider, Weisweiler, Richter, Arts, just to name some of them. And of course, as a German student that has just arrived in Paris, I was completely amazed by the idea that centuries ago, many Germans have worked and lived in Paris. Yeah, I think you're special, and created these beautiful works of art. And so eager to learn more about their journeys and their histories, I started researching and remarked that despite the fact that many art historians had already noticed the important presence of all those Germans, no real study on the migration movement, their origins, or the impact on the furniture they had in Paris has been done. Furniture historians, especially in France, agreed that since the Germans created French furniture or furniture in the dominant French styles, their origins are not as important or could be neglected. But just because they designed French furniture doesn't mean that coming to France as a migrant had no significance or effect on the artworks. On the contrary, as I will show in this lecture, it is fundamental to understanding the object. It was precisely their migration background that significantly conditioned the living and working conditions of the Germans, their scope of action, their contacts, their corporations in Paris, and thus the framework in which all these furniture pieces were created. So in today's presentation, I would like to give you insights on this major topic. We will look in a first step on the migration, so on the importance of that movement. We will retrace where those cabinet makers came from and why they came to Paris. In the second part, we will focus on their integration and examine how they try to settle down, making a living, what difficulties they've encountered, and how they would overcome them. So, due to the very high number of those migrants, as you will see very soon, in the third part, I will use 5 case studies to tell the different stories, their ups and downs, and their success or failure in Paris. So, we have a lot of material, be with me. Well, who had never dreamed to come to Paris? So already in the 17th century, some German-speaking cabinet makers started to migrate to Paris. But the movement became actually more and more important in the 1740s and up to the 1770s. So to understand the importance of this migration movement, we need to consider 2 levels: quantity and quality. So, looking at the most successful cabinet makers in the 18th century in Paris, we easily notice that most of them, or many of them, had German origins. Many of them achieved important positions as royal cabinet makers, worked in royal workshops, hold privileged titles, or made furniture for the high aristocracy. Understanding the importance of the movements in terms of quantity is trickier, because you need first to define what is a German cabinet maker, or as they say in French, un ébéniste allemand. And then you actually have to count all of them and in a determined framework, and then you have to classify them after their origins. So just a reminder, when what we usually in English call a cabinet maker, we say in French an ébéniste. So the word comes from menuisier en ébène, because in the beginning of the 17th century, some woodworkers, who are called in French menuisier, started to specialize in the art of veneering and mainly used ebony for that. An ébéniste is therefore a specialized woodworker on case furniture with marquetry, inlaid, or veneer. Then we also need to define what we mean by the characterization German, or Allemand in French, because as the present-day territory in Germany was part of the Holy Empire of the German nation, it included further areas of the present-day Austria, Poland, Hungary, Belgium, and Italy. So as a political, economic, and territorial area, the old empire remained fragmented into small states, imperial cities, prince-bishoprics, and other territories. It is so neither possible nor very sensible to draw exact borders. But the common element of the German ébénists in Paris was not a specific area of origin, but their common German language. So linguists will speak of West Germanic. and also their ability to communicate in a country with a different language, so French. So this definition also includes, for example, cabinet makers that came from border regions such as the Alsace and the Lorraine, where people would still predominantly speak German. This understanding shifts the focus also away from the borders to a linguistic community. The term is also legitimatized as a historical term in 18th century Paris, when, for example, the drawing teacher Lemonnier in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine provided a translator for German craftsmen, as you can see here. Les Allemands trouveront la commodité d'un interprète. So they will find an interpreter to help them. Now we can actually count them. And classify them after their origins. So for my statistic, I've researched, of course, general handbooks, but I did extensive research in the Bénussier Central, in the Archives Nationales in Paris, and especially one series which has a number 28, because all the Parisian notaries, they were responsible for the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, where mainly the cabinets maker settled, through the virtual inventories and the church registers of the Dutch and Swedish embassies. So, of course, not all craftsmen left traces in the archives and will remain anonymous. That's normal. Not everybody married, not everybody rented an apartment, not everybody became masters, some just passed through. But this is also where you go a little bit down the rabbit hole and you have to decide when you want to stop, because the archives are endless. So I decided, as lead for the PhD, to stop at 943 cabinet makers working in Paris from 1700 to 1799. And so from all of those, 378 were actually German, which means it's enormous. They account for around 40% of all cabinet makers working in Paris. So we checked quality, yes, quantity too. But so where did they all came from? So looking at the available sources, we noticed that the ebonists came from all over the German-speaking cultural lands, meaning from the very west with the Netherlands to the east to Prussia and the north to Sweden, which you can't see on the card because it's cut. But so we even go further north. Most of them, but as you can see here, migrated from the Austrian Netherlands, the Republic of the United Netherlands, and especially from the numerous small territories here close to the River Rhine, where we see many red dots, and of territories like the Duchy of Jülich, the Electorate of Trier, the electoral Palatine. It's a very strange for a German to tell all those names in English, right down to the border to Switzerland. So when we ask who these people were and why they migrated, we need to remind ourselves that migration, like settledness, was an integrated part of the early modern way of life and was expressed in a permanently prevailing high degree of mobility, which actually went through all the classes in Europe in the 17th and 18th century. So craftsmen like our cabinet makers would travel seasonally to find work. They would move from the land to the city, or if already in high positions, from court to court. If they were part of the guild system, they would need to take the road, doing prescribed wanderings that could take weeks or more likely several years. And traditional poems and songs, we still sing one of them to the German kids today. They bear still witness of this high mobility of the time and the long distances that the cabinet makers traveled across national borders within Europe that were much more permeable than we think they might have. So, due to the fragmentation into numerous small states, the sales market for furniture in the German speaking area was generally small. It's very difficult to say, to draw big reasons, because of course each region is a little different. So cabinet makers worked to order in generally, but wealthy nobilities, princes and prince bishops either commissioned their own court cabinet makers or acquired furniture through agent on an international market, especially of course Paris. And in the German cities, access to customers was regulated by the guild, who were very powerful in Germany. So outsiders such as country craftsmen or apprentices who did not come from a master's family faced strong protectionist obstacles to prevent from joining the guild. There were therefore few opportunities for the many German cabinet-makers. They could either try the arduous path into the guild, they could hope to be successful as a court craftsman, but then they would be at the mercy of the prince and left on their own when the prince died, or they were dismissed because a change in the guild was impossible at the time, or they could go on the road. So famine, inflation, and austerity measures, as well as high population growth, pushed the society in German-speaking countries to its limit in the 18th century. The War of the Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War exacerbated this already difficult situation. So, in hope of better work opportunities, many of them migrated or were on the move. But why Paris? To answer this question, we have to go back to the time of Louis XIV. The political efforts and the reform initiated by him and his finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, allowed the flourishing of the arts in France in general, which led to the city of Paris becoming the center for the arts and the luxury in 18th century. New trends and styles and tastes were developed here. The noble and riches from all Europe would come to Paris to furnish their most beautiful apartments and castles. In fashionable boutiques for the rich and famous, mostly in and around the Rue Saint-Honoré, specialized dealers that are called marchands merciers offered a wide range of luxury objects and artwork, lacquer, mirrors, bronzes, porcelain, and of course furniture. Guides helped strangers to navigate between the different shops, and visiting these places was an absolutely must for the whole European aristocracy and the wealthy elite. If one couldn't come, catalogs or agents must help to select and buy from the dealers. Paris thus was particularly lacking in the fragmented small territories of the German lands where most of our cabinet makers were coming from. A consistently strong demand for furniture from a national and international customer base with an immense purchasing power. Furthermore, Paris offered a unique situation in terms of its organization of the trades. In addition to the guild, which controlled furniture production in Paris, there were so-called privileged areas, or lieux privilégiés, which included the court craftsmen in the royal workshop on the one hand, and the privileged areas that were under the protection of the church. The most significant place for cabinet making in Paris became the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, which is located in the east and the outskirts of the city. So this is the Plan Togo, which is wonderful, but you see the Faubourg Saint-Antoine is here, which is apparently not east. So just to orient yourself, here the river, the Seine, usually goes from west to east, and here's the Louvre. So we're not doing sightseeing now because we don't have the time for it. But here's the Bastille when it's still standing, and so this is the Grand Rue Faubourg Saint, and this here is all part of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. So here we're in the east. I know I choose the map because you can just zoom in perfectly, and you will see a lot of details later. So then we're already coming to part 2, so you made it to the first part. So the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, here we see it a little closer. It was actually under the protection of the Abbé Saint-Antoine des Champs. And in this area, thanks to the privilege granted by Louis XIII and confirmed in 1657, artisans were allowed to practice their craft outside of the guild organization. So this was a huge advantage since cabinet makers normally had to be a French citizen and part of the Roman Catholic faith community to be able to join the guild, follow the traineeship to become a master. On top of this, if you were a stranger, you had to do a particularly long traineeship as a companion, paying very high fees and do a final exam with a much higher level of difficulty to become a master and set up your own workshop. So settling down here meant that the newly arrived craftsmen were able to start directly building their furniture as free artisans or ouvriers libres and setting up their own workshops. The cabinet makers in the German-speaking countries must have known about these opportunities through their fellow countrymen and existing connection with German peers living in Paris. So attracted by these advantages, more and more cabinet makers came to the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, which led to an important chain migration. It's like the of the chain, when one pearl connects to the other. So despite the high concentration around the main streets that you can see here we still in, this is the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. The Faubourg still had a very rural character with vegetable gardens, green spaces, and storage areas, particularly practical, especially for woods near the Seine. Most of the Germans were settling in on one of the main streets, so the Grand Rue du Faubourg Saint-Antoine, which you can see here, but also the Rue de Charonne bending northwards and the Rue de Charenton bending southwards. And you also have numerous small connecting routes between them. So in this very manageable area, the ebonists lived in close proximity to each other, sometimes even sharing the same courtyards. So living next door also meant that you knew each other, and with time they grew an important German-speaking community of cabinet makers, helping each other out. New arrivals could be sure of being taken in by a fellow countryman. They provided them with accommodations, work, and sometimes even with workrooms and tools, and brought them into contact with suppliers and customers. Immigrants, therefore, could be sure to find help locally and benefit from existing networks. As German continued to be spoken among each other, there was no language barrier on the production side. Other craftsmen in the workshop spoke German. You could get your wood from a German wood merchant. You could get bronzes from German casters. So it was possible to live in Paris for decades without even having to speak French. And as we can see here with the Molitor brothers, who after more than 10 years in Paris still needed a translator to report a theft in their workshop. The privilege of free labor created in a modern economic space in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine was geared a big demand and supply, in which considerable opportunities for advancement were accompanied by the pressure to perform and competition. In order to establish themselves permanently on the Parisian furniture market, most of them pursued a dual strategy. On the one hand, they tried to stand out with particularly high quality cabinet maker work. On the other hand, they strove to marry into an established family of cabinet makers by marrying a sister, a daughter, or a widow of an ebonist, and even better, of a master, as their social and professional networks were absolutely linked with each other. Family support through relationships and financial means were necessary for the functioning of a workshop, and there are numerous examples where this support was lacking and led to failure. Marriage ensured networking with other cabinet makers and other professional groups that were important for the production of producing furniture pieces as well as customers. If the bride's brother, father, or deceased husband was also a master craftsman, this accelerated the path to the mastery, so becoming a master in the guild. Marrying a widow of a cabinet maker was particularly advantageous for newcomers, as the cabinet maker usually took over a full functioning workshop, pieces of furniture, workbenches, tools, wood supply, and a staff of employees and the clientele. So constantly growing and producing high quality furniture, the cabinet makers of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine actually became the biggest competition of the guild. This led the guild leaders to impose to all masters to stamp again their furniture with a workshop stamp consisting usually of the master's name in the revision of their statutes in 1743-45. So we're here really where the migration movement also becoming more and more important in terms of quantity. Then when the master would stamp their furniture, that was usually during the visit of the Gironde, and so you see also the GME, it's the stamp of the furniture. So also the free artisans were allowed to build furniture in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. They were not allowed to sell their pieces in the city of Paris, which was regulated by the guild. So this measure made it much more difficult to sell your furniture. So you could produce, but you cannot sell. To better control the borders, even between the Faubourg Saint Antoine and the Guild area, the Guild community sometimes organized guards at the Port Saint Antoine. They intercept transports of the free cabinet makers into the city and confiscated them. That's why most of the newcomers started working for other masters, cabinet makers that were also active as furniture dealers, or for our famous marchand mercier. The latter had the right to trade all kinds of objects, finished or unfinished, stamped or not, and could thus sell pieces from the free artisans from the Faubourg Saint Antoine. This kind of cooperation became quite interesting for many German cabinet makers because the dealers would pay them on a regular basis and provide them with very expensive materials. So also the guild hierarchy officially fought against the free ebonists in the Faubourg Saint Antoine as their strongest competitors. The most skilled among them were integrated into the guild society and thus into the guild system by being accepted into the master as masters. The guild thus absorbed its competitors. For most ebonists, the Faubourg therefore offered the possibility of work with the hope of an economic and social advancement, and for the most skilled, it was the starting point of a career springboard. And now we actually see a little bit more furniture because I know that's why you're here. So with all this knowledge now, we now want to look at concrete examples of how different this migration could look, how the cabinet makers integrated, how they rose and failed. And we will proceed chronologically, starting with very important cabinet makers and also ending with smaller ones, also because just the documentation we're having on them at the end of the 18th century is much bigger than for the beginning. So we're starting with Jean-Pierre Latz, and so next week or the week after, there's a very important show on this very important cabinet makers in Dresden, and so of course we had to figure here in. So his migration to Paris was targeted and planned in advance, which is very rare because we actually can finally prove it. And from his naturalization letter, we know that he arrived in Paris in 1719 and at an already age of 28 years. So it means he had already worked a long time in Germany. He had already accomplished his tour there. And just 1 year later, I just found out a few months ago, he already married Marguerite Geniken, who is the sister of Pierre Geniken, a German ebonist working as a free artisan in the Faubourg Saint Antoine. So this is very unusual because the integration process usually takes about that. An integration process is usually and in a marriage takes about 10 years and could take even longer. But when you look at their hometowns, we can see that Marguerite Geniken and her brother both comes from the Duchy de Liège, which is not too far from the hometown of Latz. I checked on Google. It's a 2 or 3 walk day. So therefore, Latz kind of must have known the family before or even had concrete information about what to expect in Paris. With this marriage, Latz secured a place in an important network of German cabinet makers that went already from the 17th century to Paris and also from similar areas in Germany into the Faubourg Saint Antoine. Pierre Geniken, the brother of Latz's wives, came in the 1690s to Paris, where he was taken in by a network of Germans around the cabinet maker called Sigismund Flexan that already came to Paris in the 1760s or 70s. This shows how effective the integration mechanism between the Germans was over generation and also very established. So after coming to Paris, it was actually his brother-in-law, Pierre Geniken, who supplied him with orders and work and introduced him to the latest Parisian fashions, as Pierre Geniken produced polandums, housings with boule marqueterie in his studios with 5 workbenches, as Latz later did. We do have proof of this because in 1721, so remember he came in 1719, married in 1720 and 21, we have the inventory. Um, and in this inventory, as it was dressed, we have lads that figured in there with money that his brother-in-law still owed him due to the work he was doing for him. So lads arose to become one of the most important cabinet makers in the first half of the 18th century. In 1738, he received a royal privilege, the one as marchand ébéniste privilégié du roi, suivant la cour et conseil de Sa Majesté. But he continued to work in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. He would supply royal courts through Europe via agent, alongside of Augustus of Poland and his prime minister, the Count Heinrich von Brühl, and also the greatest political revival, Frederick the Great, who acquired a considerable amount of his furniture. Furthermore, a large collection has been identified in Parma, which was presumably purchased by Louis XV's daughter, Marie-Louise Elisabeth de Bourbon. So after the death of his first wife, Latz had already secured his place and a permanent position as a cabinet maker. This allowed him to marry outside of a family of cabinet makers for his second marriage. In 1739, he married Marie Madeleine Seignac, the daughter of a builder and entrepreneur. This union brought Latz financial means and contacts with well-heeled bourgeoisie and the aristocratic society. So you can see that all here with the, you see here you have Doron, the Abbesse Doron, all the wonderful signatures. And which is also very interesting, it's great to see that there is still his brother-in-law, his former brother-in-law, beginning was signed as a witness. And we also find his youngest brother from Germany, who actually traveled from Germany to, find him here, Johannes Matthias Latz, to assist at his brother's wedding. So it also shows how close the contact was, how people in Germany was very well informed what was going on in Paris at that time and about the opportunities and the structure there. So after the death of his first, Latz's workshops also produced furniture in the more contemporary style with veneer in geometric patterns, and this includes this chest of drawer with a wavy-like veneer, which is just a technical masterpiece. Arlene Hagenbotham, our conservator at the Getty, counted it's 135 small pieces of wood that were joined together on the wavy first surface to achieve this natural-looking wave. The bronze of these commodes are also very distinctive, sculpture-like, and characteristic of the workshop, as same for the bull marquetry pieces. This is because Latz produced mounts for gilt bronze on his own, which was his right as a royal privileged person. But in 1749, the guild authorities of the founders visited the workshop and seized the various ornaments and tools, accusing him to violate the guild rules. At the end, eventually, Latz regained possession of his property, but it shows us how the guild saw the ebonists in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine as a constant threat and tried constantly to disturb their production. After his death in 1754, his wife runs along Latz's nephew, Pierre Tillman, who worked in the workshop, and with her death 2 years later, the workshop was closed. Now we're coming to one very important family around Jean-François Oeben, our second case study. So Jean-François Oeben, or Johann Franz, was the first child of a postmaster in Heinsberg near Aachen in the Duchy of Jülich, and he would become one of the most influential and successful and important cabinet makers of the 18th century. In 1754, he became cabinet maker to Louis XV, and his success caused all siblings to follow him to Paris. So here we really have a family, which you see here. He must have come to Paris in the early 1740s, where he settled in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine and integrated himself into a German-speaking community. He secured his permanent place by marrying Françoise Marguerite van der Cruz, the eldest daughter of the cabinet maker Franz van der Cruz, who probably emigrated from Flanders. The two families remained closely intertwined for decades and through further marriages, and they formed one of the most important and influential cabinet makers families in Paris. So you don't have to remember all of those names, but it just shows you the importance, and also how you just, you have already someone, to work with. You could get your bronze from your brother-in-law. Very convenient to marry into such a system. So the Faubourg Saint-Antoine not only served as a starting point for Oeben, but it also became a springboard for his extraordinary career. And with his talents, he stood out from the crowd and started working in the royal workshop of Charles-Joseph Boulle, son of the famous André Charles de Boulle, cabinet maker to Louis XIV. So after Boulle's death, he had to leave the workshop, but he got a place in the royal workshops in the Gobelin manufactory, where he started to work with his brother Simon. Only 2 years already after moving to the Gobelins, Jean-François obtained accommodations and a workshop in the Arsenal, where he moved with his sister, closer to his colleagues and his family in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. Keeping the workshop at the Gobelins, he puts his brother Simon at the top of the workshop as his premier compagnon. The furniture production of both workshops remained very closely, and after the death of his brother, Simon Oeben took over the workshop completely and was awarded also the title of the ébéniste ordinaire du roi. So at the Arsenal, François even received permission to build a forge to cast his own metal fittings. So he designed highly technical furniture, such as the table à la Bourgogne, or also an armchair for the Duc de Bourgogne. For his interventions, he was awarded the title of the ébéniste mécanicien du roi in 1760. He also invented mechanical tables that could be transformed, for example, into writing tables and dressing tables, like this one here. He also is credited with having reintroduced naturalistic floral marquetry, which had fallen out of fashion, and worked very hard on dyeing his marquetry into real wood paintings. In the Arsenal, Oeben was also exposed to very different crafts. Just next to him in the Arsenal was a manufacturer of dyed fabrics founded by Jacques Daniel Coton, where he took inspirations from the Indians, a type of printed or painted textile inspired by similar textiles originally made in India, that we see here in the very flat marquetry with the exotic flowers. By relocating the workshop between the Bastille and the Seine, Oeben moved closer to the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. This proximity allowed for an intense collaboration between the Arsenal and the Faubourg. Numerous cabinet makers from the Faubourg worked from Oeben's workshop, either directly or through subcontracted deliveries, including many cabinet makers of German origins. So why do we know that? We know that because we have staff inventories where all those people came and said, "You owe me money." So even after his premature death, because he died in a very early age of 31 years, the close cooperation between the cabinet makers of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine and the workshop in the Arsenal was first taken over by his widow, Françoise Marguerite van der Cruz, and then her new husband, Jean-Henri Riesener. But it's also very important because as we the role of women here, because as we see in the Tablette Royale, till 1777, so over 10 years after Oeben's death, the workshop there still figured as Veuve Oeben. So you see it here with written with an H. I tried to mark it. Oeben, Veuve à l'Arsenal, tient magasin considérable d'ébénisterie. So this shows the importance also of the women in the organization and the production of the cabinet maker workshop. Her favor was very hard for, and it was 4 years later that she married Johann Heinrich Riesener, who worked also for the company. Riesener continued first the production of Oeben, for example, when he finished the extraordinary mechanical roll-top desk designed for Louis XV, which he also very silently proud in one of the marquetry fields that you can see here. Riesener fits its 1769 à l'Arsenal de Paris. So his workshop was continued by also a German cabinet maker. And we're coming to our next case study, the third. We're nearly at the end, only two left. So I could talk, of course, hours about this person, which is very difficult, so I reduce it. Because Martin Kahne is actually a very representative example, as he worked almost exclusively for other ebenists or for other dealers. He is originally from Freiburg im Breisgau in the southwest of Germany, and must have come in the end of the 1740s, beginning of the 1750s, to the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, where he met Roger van der Cruz, which is the brother-in-law of Jean-François Euben. You will know the names all come back at one time. So he was the one who puts Carlin in contact with his brother-in-law, Jean-François Euben, and Carlin started to work for him in the Arsenal, where he lived right next to him here in the Quai de Célestin. So here we have the Arsenal, here was the workshop of Euben, and Carlin just lived here. So really next door, very convenient. It's also there where he met his future wife, the sister of Euben, Marie-Catherine, whom he married in 1759. After the wedding, the couple moved back to the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, here in the Grand Rue du Faubourg Saint-Antoine, right here on the corner. And Carlin set up his own workshop, but continued to work for Euben as he was listed with payments due in the inventory of 1763. In 1766, he became a master of the guild, so it also took a little while. And with his first pieces of furniture, that were stamped with his mark, we can still see the important influence of his brother-in-law. After the death of Euben, Carlin started to work more extensively for Parisian marchand mercier, especially for Simon Philippe Poirier, and then later with his successor Dominique Daguerre, whose label we can see here under the side of this writing table. Poirier was the one who provided Carlin with porcelain plaques from the Royal Porcelain Manufacture in Sèvres to integrate them in furniture. Carlin was very skilled, and thus he became the preferred cabinet maker for this type of inlay work. This has also resulted in a serious production, such as the one of the jewels coffer and stand. 7 of them are in public collection. The same applies to the model of the Bonheur du Jour, of which we know as many as 11 examples. So they don't fit on one slide. So you just get the jewel coffers. But so the marchand mercier would also supply him with other luxury materials as hard stone, mosaics, or Asian lacquer. And this ensemble with lacquer panels from Japan was made by Carlin and delivered through the Dano brothers to Madame Victoire, one of the aunts of Louis XVI, for the Chateau de Bellevue. So you see, even if you have your production in Faubourg Saint-Antoine through this dealer, you would still supply to the court, and sometimes even with higher quality furniture than Royal Ebenists, because if you compare, for example, these lacquer cabinets and commodes to some that Riesner did, you see that the quality is not the same, and even Riesner as a royal as a royal ebenist, I'm mixing all the languages, he was not able to get this kind of first quality lacquer panels that was set into these commodes here. But the relationship between Carlin and the marchand mercier went beyond purely business relations. For example, the Danot brothers sponsored his son Simon, presumably named after his brother-in-law Simon Euben, to the Royal Free Drawing School, as they had the right as co-founders to allocate a place. The marchand mercier therefore acted also in a role of a sponsor. Carlin died in 1785, and it's very interesting because usually many of the Ebenists were highly indebted, but Carlin even had a very balanced account at the time of his death, which is probably due to his cooperations with the dealers, because he didn't have to deal with all the clients who didn't pay on time, not the amount asked, all the problems you have when you're independent. And so his wife took over the workshop, so the sister of Jean-François Euben, and she did so on the side of Caspar Schneider, also a German cabinet maker from Augsburg, who must have worked in his workshop before. Just 2 months after she married him, Schneider became a master of the Parisian Guild, which shows how much easier it also was at the end of the 18th century, and also when you married the widow of a master, to become yourself master. So he took not over only the workshop, but also the cooperation with the marchand mercier, as we can see here with this lacquer secretary. But we also know that he has his own clientele, which he perhaps took over from Carlin, but we don't know. Marie-Catherine dies in 1799, and we don't know what happens to the rest of the family. One of the daughters lived in the beginning of the 19th century with another cabinet maker still in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, and then we just lose the trace. Okay. our fourth case study is Mathieu Guillot Crémer. And he is the one who took the plunge into self-employment and left the Faubourg Saint-Antoine to become a trader or a marchand himself. So we see this very interestingly in all the documents we find about him, because in the beginning he will call an ebonist, and he would be a master eboniste, so a master, and then he's becoming ebonist marchand. So there you really see the transformation. So he was the son of a Protestant businessman born in Grevenbroich, which is next to Düsseldorf. He must have come to the Faubourg in the 1760s and worked for Carlin, and married at the late age of 38 into a French Protestant cabinetmaker family, which is called Collet. Kramer pursued a multiple strategy to integrate into Parisian furniture market. He not only worked in a German-speaking cabinetmakers network in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, with cabinetmakers like Martin Calin and Roger van der Cruz, but he also benefited from the connection of the German-speaking Protestant chapel of the Swedish embassy, where we find him in the registers. So 3 days after the marriage contract was signed, the church wedding was celebrated in the Protestant chapel of the Swedish embassy. Only a few months after the wedding, Crémer received the title of the Master of the Guild, which is very interesting because he was Protestant. So you see, there were always means at the time. So this shows us how flexible the guild was regarding newcomers. Thanks to his strong local network, Kramer took the plunge and became an independent merchant. In 1776, he received 3,000 livres from his aunt, which he invested in his own store in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, which is on this side, which we also call the left bank in Paris. So which is here on the right, so it's very annoying. The inventory made after the death of his wife in 1783 provides us deep insight into the living and working environment. He rented an apartment, but Crémer had actually 3 boutiques, of one which is described as a workspace, as well as a large warehouse with numerous precious woods. With 4 workbenches and an établi étau, Crémer was still making furniture, but it is clear that his activity shifted more and more to those of a dealer. A total of 129 pieces of furniture, several unfinished, including tables, chests of drawers, secretaries, but also armchairs, fire screens, and candlesticks are listed. He owed money to numerous ebonists, from whom he purchased complete or partial pieces of furniture. His suppliers are well-known and also well-known German and French ebonists such as Charles Topino or Roger van der Cruz, and in his commodes we can still see a lot of similarity to the pieces from him. From the inventory of 1783, we also see that Crémer had successfully built up a local aristocratic clientele around his boutique. He frequently used marquetry with geometric patterns or stylized mostly 4-petaled flowers, such as those that we can see here on the bureau, on the bonheur du jour. The poor payment mentally of the French nobility caused Crémer increasing financial difficulties, and with the troubles of the revolution, he was no longer able to maintain his business in Rue du Bac, despite all the efforts, and finally filed for bankruptcy in March 1719. After the economic setback, Crémer moved back in proximity to Faubourg Saint-Antoine, but he suffered further personal tragedies and died alone in the age of 17 in 1800. He must have continued to work as an ebonist until the end of his life. So we still have a kind of little small inventory where we see that he has rented a room on the 2nd floor with 2 workbenches and several tools. German-French Latin dictionary also is in his possession and testifies from his higher education. And in the inventory we also find a journal in which he kept record from the events of his life. So not to end of the sad notes, you have to be with me and stay for the last case, which is Karl Erdmann Richter, who comes from Schmiedeberg in the Electorate of Saxony, and he survived the trouble of the revolution and continued his workshop till the 19th century. So he was also a Lutheran, and attended the chapel of the Swedish embassy in Paris, where he married the daughter of a wine merchant from Sancerre and baptized two children there. The circle of people present at the wedding and the christening testifies the overlap of social and professional connection in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. These include the ebonist Jean-Baptiste Bouchard, the ebonist Fidelis Shea from Lake Constance and his wife, but also the sister of the ebonist Claude Montigny and a bronze master named Joseph Müller, also a German. In the Protestant community, Richter also must have met the master craftsman and furniture dealer Joseph Gottlieb. So Joseph Gottlieb Frost took over the workshop from Röntgen, which is a very, very important German cabinet maker working in Germany, in Neuwied, who still has his workshop all there. And so we have in the bankruptcy of Frost, we still find the name Richter. So also he held the title of a master, as you can see here. He's called Maître Richter, Monsieur Richter, Maître Ébéniste. Yep. And so even after becoming a master, he still would supply to different dealers, to different cabinet makers. And evidently ran his own store in the Rue Traversière. But he was also subcontractors for other cabinet makers, like the German Ohneberg, but also Pierre Garnier, Louis Aubray, and Jean-Henri Riesener. For example, this secretary delivered by Riesener in 1784 for the administration of the Garde-Meuble de la Couronne bears the stamp of Richter and Riesener. So Richter's workshop survived the revolution and the crisis of the Napoleonic Wars. One of the employees in his workshop was the German Jean-Bernard Dietz from Frankfurt, where I'm also from, who married Richter's daughter, Marie-Suzanne Richter, in 1802. So between 1882 and 1820, the workshop is still listed in the Almanach de Commerce as being in the Rue Traversière under Richter's management. It was continued under his management of his son-in-law after that. Richter died at the very old age of 84 in 1829, and his daughter is listed as the owner of a house in the Rue Traversière until her death in 1862. So let me come to my conclusion. Coming to Paris allowed numerous German-speaking ebonists to exercise their skills and talents far better than in their home regions. With them, they brought not only their ambition and their motivation, but also their knowledge and high skills. Marc-André Roubaud, who wrote a very important book on cabinet making, noticed this in his publication, that the German brought over a particular workbench to Paris, with a special device that makes it possible to clamp wood of any length without screw clamps. It is called the German workbench, or in French, the établi allemande. So in particular, the Faubourg Saint-Antoine was the first point of contact for newcomers, but it was also a training ground, a career springboard for many of them seeking social and advancement and better working condition. In Paris, they perfected their craft and adopted the latest fashion and technical achievement in this pre-economic area characterized by competition and cooperation. And so it's also thanks to the numerous German cabinet makers that were striving through those social and economic advancement that the Faubourg Saint-Antoine in the end became one of the most important production sites in the furniture trade and made the Germans to the strongest competitors of the Parisian Guild. The uninterrupted influx of cabinet makers of German origins increased the competitive pressure in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. With their strong presence and high production, the German immigrants challenged the French guild community. The emergence of such a momentum on the Parisian furniture market would not have been possible without the presence of the German cabinet makers. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. I think we're all kind of dazzled by research. I'm seeing a huge diagram where you put this all together with arrows, so maybe you need 3 or possibly 4 dimensions to click on that. Floor is open for questions.
Was it too bright? Um, the marquetry that you showed that was brightly colored,
Hmm.
was that a common practice? Is it when we look at this furniture now, is a lot of it just faded, or was that a rare example of someone who brightly colored the marquetry on the
Mm,
cabinet?
so usually marquetry would have been dyed, and everybody tried to dye it and make it as much durable as possible. But it's and he really experimented a lot with it. But usually all marquetry was, or most of it, especially these, like sceneries or bouquets, they would have been colored. And sometimes we still find some, under very light protected areas, we can still find, but it's basically light and type of dyeing that usually leads to these kind of very brown tones that we have today.
Yes, right here. Here you
Your lecture was fabulous. Thank you so much. Um, noticed some of the names of the Germans who went to Paris seem to be Jewish, and since it's the first night of Rosh Hashanah, I thought I would ask this. Um, was there any discrimination against Jews in Germany, and might that have brought them to France? Or was discrimination in France just as bad?
That is a very interesting question, and I must say that I actually don't know. I definitely should consult some sources on that and see what we have for the 18th century. Thank you so much. This is very important.
Can I follow up and ask, are the names that you were identifying as Jewish, does that bear out in any of your archival research, or are those
No, we don't have it. I mean, with the sources,
documented German Jewish cabinet?
no, no one. And I'm not sure if that's why, I mean, we have to look at the sources, because I'm not sure. I mean, the contracts we're having are from the notaries, or we have church contracts. So I cannot say for Jewish.
Hello, thank you so much for your lecture. It was incredible. I wanted to ask if there were specific techniques that some of these German cabinet makers brought with them when they emigrated to Paris, and how that would have integrated into the Parisian vocabulary of cabinet making at that time.
This is very interesting because we have this migration that dures so long, over 2 centuries, that it's very difficult to tell now what is German and what is French, because since there were so many Germans, they're entire part of the system. So you can't say, oh, that motive comes from Germany, or so. And they adapted their style also to the Parisian market. So they would target French. They wanted to produce French furniture. So they're like, somebody tried to find what we have a very popular style in Germany in the beginning of the 18th century, which is the Bandelwerk, to find that in, especially Oebens marquetry. But it's, even if they would have been inspired and they would have brought it with, it's not mainly what they would have done in Paris. So I think this is, you always have to look, for whom they produce their furniture, which is very interesting because you have Germans producing for for German courts. So you have Lutz, who's selling outside to Dresden and to Berlin, or you have and these pieces of furniture will be different because they're targeting a different person. Or we have French cabinet makers. They would do completely different furniture. We have one corner cabinet from Dubois at the Getty, which was for a Polish person, and it's completely different what you would have sold in Paris. So it's actually very difficult to retrace it because they were really producing in a in a French style, and not, saying, okay, this is something I've learned there. So this is much more subtle. And but what you can find from inventories, for example, is tools. In some of the inventories, not every inventory is the same. You would find, oh, there's actually a Lima L'Anglaise, or there is a German something. So there you actually have those, like where they have been and where they traveled, and how those came from. So yeah.
Hi. do we know why it seems like all these Germans who did come to Paris, they were always ébénistes, so they were always making case furniture, and there don't seem to be any menuisier chair makers who come. And I'm just wondering, has anyone sort of studied that or looked into why that was the case? If it was something to do with the guilds or just financial reasons, or I'm just curious.
No, there's no study on that. They mainly were cabinet makers. I think my explanation is also because cabinet making has a very strong tradition in Germany, much more than the menuisier. And the menuiserie was really in a very strong French family hand. They were living inside in Paris, so much more difficult to access. But what I haven't told you here in the lecture, because I was already running late, is that you actually find also menuisiers in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine that are German. You find various different craftsmen specialized in different areas. But usually the traditional is that you would say, oh, all the cabinet makers are mainly German and all the menuisiers are mainly French. But this is something more interesting to look into.
Just ask on that, did it have to do with the amount of money that might be made in these respective trades, or are they equal?
I think they're equal. It also depends because when you're a menuisier, you don't really you don't really do a lot of furniture because you would build the structure of the chair. Then, it will go to a sculpture. He will sculpt the chair. It will be gilded sometimes, and then you have all the textiles, the upholstery, which is also a different trade. So it's also perhaps because of these people they were working with, that there was more in French hand than Germans getting into that field. But as you see, some of the Germans, even we know it from Frost and we know it from Kremer, in the inventories we find that they were selling chairs too. But we're unable to say where they're coming from, if they made it themselves. We know from from Frost that some of them came actually from cabinet makers.
Well, thank you so much. This was really fascinating. And it seems that many of the Germans, at least the ones that we are familiar with, were very successful. Do you have any evidence that some actually returned back to
Yes.
where they came from because they were not successful? You do?
Yes, there are actually some of them that sometimes just disappeared. We have one case which is Maurice Ewald, and he was kind of successful. He was working for the crown, and from one day on the other, he was so indebted that at some point they just closed the workshop because he fled with his daughter and probably back to Germany, and they just freed it. He just left, and there are many cases of that where people they come and they go, and you lose traces of them. And so yeah, we have also, of course, I mean, what I'm showing here is also all those people produce furniture. We have records of them, so we always already here at a very selective point of successful cabinet makers.
Thank you.
So I also have a question that like if the immigrants like moved to like from Germany to France and from France to Germany, is there like significant like relationship like in Germany also like influenced by like a French style? So like due to the immigrants, like the rate is
Can I'm not sure if I stand correct. You mean that if because of the Germans that the French styles kind of traveled back to Germany?
yeah.
Okay. Not that we know of. Sometimes yes. It's not true. We know it for the Swedish court, where also people. So we also always have to look at the sources that we're having, and for cabinet makers, they're sometimes very small. Um, but we know that, for example, for the Swedish court, there were people, there were cabinet makers coming to Paris not as migrants but to learn, and then went back to the Swedish court and worked and just produced their French style furniture. So there was this exchange. But what we also a lot actually in the from German small court sees that they would send people to train in Paris, getting them back. So here we're not talking about migration anymore, because migration really means that you don't live there anymore. You move to another place, and they're different kind of migrations. But so you have that kind of back and forth and influence also back to France, back to Germany.
Survival. We know that dressmakers and seamstresses for Marie Antoinette in the court were cheerfully sent to the guillotine. All of the ébénistes seem, from the dates I've saw, have survived the terror. Does that mean they were German nationals and were untouched and went back to Germany? They survived the terror. What is the story there?
Actually, it's funny because a lot of them were actually how you call it, they came to the Bastille. When the Bastille was. Yes, now it's only German words coming in my mind. But so when the crowd conquered the Bastille, stormed the Bastille. Thank you. You have like a register with many names of the heroes of that day, and actually a lot of them were some of them were German cabinet makers. So they were really part of the community there, and they were not sent. They just stayed. And
they did stay
they
during
did
the
stay.
revolution.
Yeah, many of them did stay and just, I think, hoped for better times.
Thank you.
We got another up here.
May we take a picture of this?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure. We also have a reconstruction on the Getty website if you want to see, and there's a video and.
There are a number of these. Could I take pictures? Please take pictures. I just want to come back to this idea of migration and integration. And you stressed at the beginning of your talk the importance of language communities, in being a kind of refuge, a separate community within the city. But are you able to track how this played out either in successive generations or even in the course of a migrant's life? Do you have examples, or do you have a sense that learning the French language was extremely important and advantageous to some migrants and allowed them to ascend higher, were others hampered by not learning French? And I suppose one might ask the same thing about Protestant religion as opposed to Catholicism. Did any of them switch religions as they were switching languages?
Okay, so for religion, I don't believe so, because we have important Protestants, and it seems that even if, for example, in the guild regulation and officially they've been fought, there were very big tolerance, and you would even have Catholic cabinet makers assisting at Protestant weddings, and so it was not really important. Your religion was not so important. Language was important for one point if you wanted to sell your own furniture, because then you needed to speak French because you had French clientele, and then it's where it's become tricky for most of them. If you're not integrating enough that you have that you can sell, or you have somebody to sell for you, that's fine. But
just that selling yourself exposes you, in a sense, to the vicissitudes of aristocrats who don't pay and all sorts of other things, and perhaps it's safer to stay within the community behind the scenes and let someone else assume
sometimes
those
it
risks.
is. It's the risk you're taking. But I mean, many of them were kind of advantaged because they left their homelands and they wanted to move, and they were going somewhere they knew in some extent, but you always, when you're coming in.
So how many became bilingual, and can you tell that from your archival evidence?
Not much. I'm still surprised by how many I see you need a translator, because only speaking German. But I think even so, with time, they learned basic French. Not very good French, but they could communicate. And even we see it from Gaspar Schneider. We have invoices where you see his French, which is very German. And also Benman, who is the very last royal cabinet maker to Louis XVI, had a huge, strong German accent. You see it in everything that he's written himself. It's horrible. You don't know how the man made it so far, but no, that it's so. It really depends.
Great. Well, I think we can't wait for your handbook. We can't wait for your book. Thank you very, very much for this wonderful presentation.